Welcome to the Philosophical Odysseys podcast. We are absolutely thrilled to have you here with us today.
Yeah, really glad you're joining us for this one.
If you're joining us for this deep dive, you are likely seeking a way to cut through the relentless, exhausting noise of modern life.
Which I think we all feel on some level, right?
Oh, absolutely. We all feel it. That constant hum of notifications, the endless algorithmic scroll,
Yeah.
the overwhelming pressure to just be satisfied with the way things are, even when everything feels a little, hollow.
Right, a little empty.
You are looking for something genuinely profound. You want something that shakes the foundation a little bit, something that demands more from life than just a comfortable routine.
And if that resonates with you, you're in exactly the right place today.
Definitely. Today, our source material is a really dense, challenging, and frankly, kind of mind-bending book by the highly influential contemporary French philosopher Alain Badiou. It's called The Metaphysics of Real Happiness.
It is a remarkable, truly monumental text. Badiou is one of those rare thinkers who completely reorients the very lens through which you view the world around you.
Yeah, he doesn't pull any punches.
He really doesn't. He doesn't just ask what makes us happy in a self-help or pop psychology kind of way. He asks what happiness actually is at a structural, rigorous, and almost mathematical level.
And the mission of this deep dive is to completely unpack the radical difference between the comfortable, everyday satisfaction that is constantly sold to us by the modern world and the intense, transformative, and sometimes agonizing experience that Badiou calls real happiness.
Yes, that distinction is everything.
We are going to explore how true happiness isn't just a warm, fuzzy feeling you get after a good meal. It's an active, disciplined, rebellious state of being.
Exactly. And just as a quick note for you listening, before we really get into the weeds here,
Yeah.
Badiou's work heavily references revolutionary politics, Marxism, and severe critiques of capitalism.
Right, we should definitely clarify that.
Yeah, it's important to make it explicitly clear that we're not taking political sides here or endorsing these specific viewpoints. We are merely mapping out Badiou's philosophical architecture so you can understand his framework.
Treat it like a thought experiment.
Exactly. So to start building that architecture, Badiou leans on a brilliant phrase originally coined by the 19th century French poet Arthur Rimbaud. He defines philosophy and the pursuit of happiness as a logical revolt.
Okay, let's unpack this. A logical revolt. I have to be honest, that sounds like a total oxymoron to me.
How so?
Well, when I think of a revolt, I think of passion, chaos, people taking to the streets, burning things down. It's deeply emotional. But a logical revolt, how do those two concepts even live in the same sentence?
It's a fantastic tension, and that's precisely why Badiou uses it. He argues that true philosophical desire, the drive for real happiness, has four distinct dimensions that have to work together. First, there's a desire for rebellion. This is that gut-level reaction against the misery, the injustice, and the sheer boredom of the world as it currently exists. It's the feeling that says, this cannot be all there is.
Right, so that's the passion part. That's the fire.
Yes. But second, there's a demand for logic and rationality. Your rebellion cannot just be blind rage or a chaotic riot.
Because that doesn't really build anything.
Exactly. If you just burn things down, you haven't changed the structure of the world. You've just created a mess. True philosophical revolt needs a structure, a rigorous architecture of thought to build something new.
Makes sense. What's the third?
Third, there is a drive for universality. This means the truth you seek has to apply to all humans everywhere. It can't just be a localized truth for a select elite group of people.
So it can't just be my truth or your truth. It has to be the truth.
Exactly. And finally, the fourth dimension is a willingness to take a risk. It is the willingness to make a gamble on the unknown, to step outside of guaranteed outcomes.
So rebellion, logic, universality, and risk.
Yes. Those four dimensions are the engine of philosophical thought.
Okay, I'm with you. But looking around at our society today, I don't see a lot of logical revolt happening. I see a lot of people just trying to get by.
Yeah, and Badiou has a very clear explanation for why we don't see it. He points out that the modern Western capitalist world is perfectly, almost deviously designed to suppress and crush all four of these dimensions.
Deviously designed. I like that phrasing.
It does this by deploying four specific barriers.
I want to hear these because I definitely feel like there's a dampener on deep thought these days.
First, against the dimension of rebellion, capitalism and the world of commodities offer us a fake freedom. The system tells you that you are entirely free, but it defines that freedom solely by your ability to buy things.
Consumerism disguised as liberty.
Precisely. You aren't free to change the fundamental structures of society. You're just free to choose which brand of smartphone you want, or which streaming service to subscribe to. It pacifies the urge to rebel by replacing it with consumer choice.
Let me see if I can put this in everyday terms for you listening. Imagine you are feeling this deep existential itch. You wake up and think, I want to change my life. I want to rebel against this mundane 9 to 5 routine.
We've all been there.
Right. But instead of organizing a community movement or writing a manifesto or creating disruptive art, you just go online and buy a whole new wardrobe.
Or a new car.
Yeah, or you upgrade your car. The system gives you a little hit of dopamine, a little feeling of newness, and suddenly that existential rebellion is totally neutralized. You've been bought off with a sweater.
That is a perfect, grounded analogy. Now, the second barrier targets logic. Remember, logic requires time, sequence, coherence, and memory. Badiou argues that mass communication and modern media crush true logic by bombarding us with meaningless, memoryless fragments of information.
The endless doom scroll.
Precisely. The modern media cycle is an endless, blinding stream of disconnected images, outrages, and sound bites. It destroys coherent time. You swipe from a tragic news story to a cat video to an advertisement in the span of 10 seconds.
And your brain just can't process it logically.
I can't. This leaves us in a fragmented present where deep, logical, sequential thought struggles to survive. You cannot build a logical revolt when your attention span is being fractured every few seconds.
It makes complete sense. We're too distracted to think systematically. What about the third dimension, universality? How does the modern world crush that?
The barrier against universality is money. Badiou argues that money acts as a false, abstract, universal equivalent.
A false universal.
Yes. In a globalized economy, the grand philosophical quest for a shared human truth, something that genuinely connects all of us as human beings, is replaced by currency. The only thing that truly connects everyone universally now is the exchange rate.
Wow. It reduces human connection to a transaction.
Exactly.
So instead of a universal human truth, we get a universal price tag. Everything and everyone has a market value.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah.
And finally, the fourth barrier. The modern world crushes the ability to take true risks through an absolute obsession with personal security and calculation.
Okay, wait. Push back on this a little bit. Isn't security a good thing? We want to be safe, don't we?
We do want physical safety, yes. But Badiou is talking about existential safety. We are taught from a very young age to calculate our futures down to the decimal point.
Like planning our entire lives out.
Exactly. We are told to secure our pensions, buy comprehensive insurance, build our credit scores, and avoid the unknown at all costs. This obsession with calculated safety entirely crushes the philosophical gamble.
Because a gamble inherently means you might lose.
Right. It trains us to never roll the dice on a passionate, uncertain pursuit because it might not have a guaranteed return on investment.
I think this is so incredibly relatable for you listening right now. Think about the safety and predictability of an algorithmic social media feed. That is modern satisfaction and security in a nutshell.
It's a closed loop.
It really is. The algorithm knows exactly what you like. It feeds you exactly what will keep you comfortable, entertained, and engaged. There is zero risk of encountering something that genuinely challenges your worldview.
Not at all.
But compare that algorithmic safety to the unpredictable, terrifying thrill of quitting a safe, boring corporate job to pursue a passionate calling, or moving to a new city where you know absolutely no one.
That's where the risk comes in.
Exactly. That is the realm of true happiness, the realm of risk. But the modern world is actively, technologically designed to keep you scrolling safely, not leaping into the unknown.
This raises an important question. If the modern world is this highly efficient, well-oiled machine designed to crush the philosophical desire for logical revolt, how are modern philosophers fighting back?
You'd hope they're leading the charge.
Right. Surely the intellectual heavyweights of our era, the people whose entire job is to think, have built a defense against this.
You would certainly think so, but Badiou takes a sledgehammer to his own profession here. He delivers a brutal critique of his peers. He looks at the landscape of contemporary academic philosophy and divides it into 3 dominant blind alleys.
3 dead ends?
Yeah, he basically says the last century of thought has gone down 3 dead ends: hermeneutics, analytic philosophy, and postmodernism.
Let's break these down so the listener understands exactly what Badiou is critiquing. First, hermeneutics. which is championed by monumental figures like Martin Heidegger and Hans Georg Gadamer.
Okay, hermeneutics.
Hermeneutics is, at its core, the philosophy of interpretation. It's the idea that truth is somehow concealed or hidden beneath the surface of history and language. And the philosopher's job is to painstakingly decode texts and human experience to uncover that hidden meaning.
Like an intellectual archaeologist digging for the real meaning of a poem or an ancient text?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then you have analytic philosophy. This is rooted in thinkers like Ludwig Wittgenstein in his early years and Rudolf Carnap, and it absolutely dominates the English-speaking academic world today.
What's their focus?
Analytic philosophers focus intensely on the grammar, logic, and rules of language. They believe that most philosophical problems aren't actually deep mysteries of the universe. They are just confusions caused by sloppy language.
So if we fix the language, we fix the problem.
That's their goal, to cure philosophical confusion by making sure our sentences make perfect mathematical sense.
So they are essentially the ultimate grammar police of the universe.
In a reductive sense, yes. And finally, we have postmodernism, closely associated with thinkers like Jacques Derrida. Postmodernism is all about deconstructing grand narratives.
Pulling things apart.
Right. It pulls apart texts, histories, and power structures to show that there is no single objective truth. There is only a multiplicity of shifting meanings, perspectives, and cultural biases.
Okay, I need to jump in here. So he's looking at Heidegger, Wittgenstein, Derrida, some of the most famous thinkers of the 20th century, and he's just tossing them in the bin. How does he justify writing off the entire century of intellectual thought?
What's fascinating here is his overarching diagnosis. Despite their massive differences, despite the fact that analytic philosophers and postmodernists usually can't stand each other, Badiou argues they all share one fatal flaw.
Which is?
They have all, in their own specific ways, declared the end of classical philosophy. They have replaced the ancient search for an absolute universal truth with an absolute obsession with language.
Ah, I see. So whether it's interpreting language like the hermeneutics folks, establishing the strict rules of language like the analytic folks, or deconstructing language like the postmodernists, they're all just hyper-fixated on words.
Precisely. They have all surrendered the concept of a singular, capital T truth in favor of multiple language games or cultural interpretations.
So if these postmodernists and analytic philosophers broke everything down into language games, what is Badiou's issue with that? Why is it a blind alley? If language is flawed, shouldn't we focus on it?
Because Badiou says that by doing this, philosophy has accidentally surrendered to the modern world's fragmentation.
Oh, wow.
Think about it. If philosophy just throws its hands up and says, well, everything is relative, everything is just a language game, there are multiple truths depending on your culture, the philosophy offers absolutely no fixed, solid point to stand against the chaos of global capitalism.
It just becomes part of the noise.
It just mirrors the fragmentation of the free market.
That is a staggering critique. So if you have no unconditional truth to stand on, you have no leverage to push back against the relentless circulation of money and meaningless media.
Exactly. You are disarmed.
You can't say, this is definitively wrong, because you've already agreed that truth is relative. You just become another voice in the void, another opinion on the internet.
So Badiou says we have to get away from this obsession with language. We had to break out of the linguistic turn of the 20th century. His proposed solution is incredibly ambitious. He says philosophy must return to being a mathem.
Okay, you're going to have to explain mathem to me, because that sounds like a word someone made up while playing Scrabble.
Yeah.
What is a mathem, and how does it bypass language?
It is a concept he adapts from the psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan. A mathem is a universally transmissible truth that bypasses cultural language games entirely.
How does something bypass language entirely?
The easiest way to understand this is to look at mathematics itself. Take a mathematical truth, like the fact that prime numbers are infinite. That truth holds absolute weight, regardless of what culture you are from, what spoken language you use, what your political beliefs are, or what century you live in. 2 + 2 = 4, whether you are a capitalist in New York or a monk in Tibet.
Right. Mathematics doesn't rely on cultural interpretation to be true.
Yes, but you wants philosophical truth to have that kind of piercing, undeniable universality. He wants to rescue truth from the quicksand of relativism.
That is a massive undertaking.
It is. Furthermore, he says philosophy must deliberately slow down time. To counter the blinding speed of modern communication, the 24-hour news cycle, and the fragmented media feeds, philosophy has to reclaim the slow, methodical, rigorous time of deep thought. It takes time to build a matheme.
It is a radical proposition to step completely outside the linguistic obsession of the modern era. But here's where it gets really interesting. While Badiou is harshly critiquing these academic, language-obsessed philosophers, he holds a deep, almost secret admiration for a rogue group of thinkers from history.
The anti-philosophers.
Yes, he calls them the anti-philosophers.
This is one of my favorite parts of Badiou's work. The anti-philosophers are a brilliant, eclectic cast of characters. We're talking about Blaise Pascal, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Søren Kierkegaard, Friedrich Nietzsche, Ludwig Wittgenstein in a different phase of his thought, and Jacques Lacan.
These guys sound like the bad boys of intellectual history. What makes them anti-philosophers? They all wrote philosophy books.
They did, but they are not your typical systematic academic philosophers. They don't sit in ivory towers building neat logical systems block by block.
So what's their approach?
Their style is fierce, unforgiving, and deeply, sometimes painfully, personal. They are brilliant writers who essentially wage a guerrilla war against conceptual academic philosophy.
So what is their core belief? Why are they fighting the academics?
Their core belief is completely contrary to the slow building of systems. They believe that truth isn't something you systematically construct. Truth is something you encounter.
In an encounter?
Yes. It hits you like a lightning bolt. It requires a radical absolute choice, a leap into the unknown.
Wait, so why does Badiou love these guys so much? Badiou is basically the king of systematic, mathematically based concept-building philosophy. He's the ultimate system builder. Why is he fanboying over these fierce, chaotic anti-philosophers?
Because the anti-philosophers teach us a vital lesson that systematic philosophy often forgets in its cold logic. They teach us that true life, real happiness, requires risking oneself in a chance encounter.
Going back to the risk dimension.
Exactly. You can't just think your way into happiness from the safety of an armchair or a chalkboard. You have to put skin in the game. Furthermore, they champion a kind of radical equality.
What do you mean by radical equality?
In the eyes of the anti-philosophers, anyone, absolutely anyone, no matter their social status, their level of formal education, or their wealth, can encounter the absolute.
Because it's an encounter, not a degree you earn.
Right. You don't need a PhD in hermeneutics to experience a life-altering truth. The encounter is democratic.
Okay, I love this. And that brings us perfectly to Søren Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard has this foundational concept of maintaining objective uncertainty. Can you break that down for us?
Absolutely. Objective uncertainty is a crucial concept for you, the listener, to grasp if you want to understand real happiness. Kierkegaard basically says that relying on comfortable democratic consensus or social contracts or looking around to see what everyone else agrees is normal or safe is a total trap.
It's the ultimate herd mentality.
Exactly. Objective uncertainty means looking at the world, seeing that there are no guarantees, no objective mathematical proofs that the life path you are choosing is the right one or the safe one, and making the choice anyway out of sheer inner passion.
Taking the leap.
It is the exact opposite of the modern calculation of risk we talked about earlier. It is stepping into the void.
I want to give the listener a real-world example of how intensely these anti-philosophers actually lived this out. They didn't find the absolute in calm, peaceful meditation retreats. They found it in ordinary, sometimes agonizing moments.
Very agonizing sometimes.
Yeah. Take Rousseau. He had these intense physical fainting spells where he felt completely overwhelmingly consumed by the sheer fact of existence. Or Kierkegaard. Let's talk about the famous story of Kierkegaard and Regine Olsen.
It is a devastating and perfect example of objective uncertainty.
Right. So Kierkegaard was engaged to this woman, Regine, whom he deeply, profoundly loved. It wasn't a bad relationship, but he famously broke off the engagement.
He just walked away.
And he didn't do it because he fell out of love with her. He did it because he felt this agonizing internal calling to reach a higher spiritual, philosophical plane, and he believed that the comfortable, socially acceptable institution of marriage would somehow prevent him from reaching it.
He had to break the comfortable path to find the truth.
I'm sure Regine was absolutely thrilled to hear that she was being dumped so Søren could achieve maximum objective uncertainty. That's quite the, it's not you, it's my philosophical trajectory breakup text.
It sounds like madness to our modern, rational, security-obsessed ears. But to Badiou, via Kierkegaard, this painful story suggests something profound. True happiness isn't just a calm smile on a beach. It requires intensity. It requires a break with the normal. As Kierkegaard implies, a pinch of despair is the spice of true happiness.
A pinch of despair. I have to stop you there. Why on earth do we need despair to be happy? That sounds so bleak.
It isn't bleak when you understand the mechanics of it. That phrase means that without the genuine possibility of loss, without the anguish of making a real, unguaranteed choice, any happiness you feel is just shallow satisfaction.
So the risk gives it value.
Exactly. If there is no risk, there's no weight to the choice. The despair, the anxiety of the unknown is what guarantees that your choice actually matters.
Okay, so we have this intensely personal, almost agonizing idea of the encounter, this collision with truth on an individual level. But I'm struggling to see how this scales up.
How so?
Well, if an encounter is this deeply personal shock to the individual system, how does my personal realization change the actual physical world? Isn't the world just too big for one person's subjective epiphany to matter?
That is the pivotal transition in Badiou's work. It leads us directly to the classic monumental question which Badiou addresses head-on. How do we change the world?
Okay, big question.
To answer that, we first have to rigorously define what we actually mean by the world. Badiou is incredibly precise here. He identifies 5 distinct levels of what we call the world.
Let's lay them out for the listener. Level 1 is the individual mind and body, your personal, internal, biological world. Level 2 is closed groups, your specific culture, your nation state, your family unit. Level 3 is the open historical process, the grand sweep of human history and global civilization.
Keep going.
Level 4 is the natural and biological world, the planet, the ecology, flora and fauna. And level 5 is the physical universe, stars, galaxies, quantum mechanics.
Perfect. Now, when we talk about changing the world in a philosophical or political sense, we're usually talking about intervening in levels 2 and 3, society and history. And here, Badiou introduces his most famous, his absolute central concept, the event.
The event, with a capital E.
Exactly. Now, we need to be very careful to distinguish an event from a normal crisis.
Because there are crises happening all the time. Financial crashes, wars, elections.
Right. A financial crash, a divisive election, even a tragic war in Badiou's structural framework.
Yeah.
These are usually just regular crises. They're just part of the system's normal cycle.
Wait, a war is part of the normal cycle?
Structurally speaking, yes. It is the machine working exactly as it was designed to work, even if the output is highly destructive. Think of it like a computer program crashing because of a bug. It's a crisis, but it's still operating within the rules of the existing code.
So what makes an event different from a bug in the code?
An event is a local rupture. It is not just a glitch. It is a fundamental tear in the fabric of reality that reveals something previously hidden, or more importantly, something that was deemed completely structurally impossible by the existing rules of that specific world.
Impossible.
Yes, it is not an update to the operating system. It is the sudden introduction of a completely alien logic.
Okay, let's ground this with the historical examples Badiou uses. Now, I know Badiou uses some pretty intense historical examples to illustrate this concept of the event. And for you listening, we need to frame this carefully again.
Yes, the impartiality aspect.
Right. We are treating his examples like a physicist treats a vacuum chamber, just a controlled theoretical environment to see how his structural theories work.
Exactly. We are mapping the architecture of his thought. Whether you agree with his politics or not, his framework for understanding how change happens is philosophically fascinating.
So with that framework in mind, Badiou's first major example of an event is May 1968 in France.
Yes, the massive, unprecedented civil unrest. Prior to May 68, the absolute, unquestioned rule of the French societal world, and interestingly, even the rule within the Orthodox French Communist Party at the time, was that intellectual bourgeois university students and blue-collar factory workers were entirely separate entities.
It didn't mix.
Never. They operated in fundamentally different spheres, they had different languages, different goals, and a unified political action between them was considered functionally impossible by the rules of that society.
They were parallel lines that were never supposed to intersect.
Precisely. But the event of May 68 ruptured that rule. Suddenly, unpredictably, students and workers were marching together, striking together, occupying factories together, and sharing a newly invented, unified political action.
The impossible happened.
Yes. The event didn't just change a law. It revealed a new truth, that this impossible unity was, in fact, absolutely possible.
And a second example brings us much closer to the present day. Tahrir Square in Egypt during the Arab Spring. Let's look at the rules of that world before the event. The established reality was a state of division, tension, or at best, cold indifference between Muslims and Christians in Egypt. That was the accepted status quo.
But during the massive occupation of the square, the event revealed a new, localized truth. There was intense, unprecedented unity. When the state police attacked, Christians formed protective rings around Muslims while they prayed, and Muslims protected Christians during their mass.
Something the societal system said was impossible suddenly became the lived reality in that specific location.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Badiou leans on a famous cryptic quote by the psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan.
Yeah.
The real is the impossible.
The real is the impossible.
Yes. Before an event happens, the world has strict boundaries of what can and cannot occur. The event forces the world to say yes to something it had previously labeled impossible. It forces the impossible to become real.
The event expands the very horizon of reality.
Yeah.
So what does this all mean for us as individuals listening to this deep dive? How does this structural philosophy translate to our daily lives? This brings us to the absolute core distinction of Badiou's entire book, the difference between satisfaction and happiness.
It is a profound, life-altering distinction.
Yeah.
Let us define satisfaction first. Satisfaction is finding your right place within the existing rules of the world. It is getting the good job, buying the nice house, saving for retirement, and fitting perfectly into the societal machine.
Checking all the boxes.
Exactly. It is fundamentally passive. You aren't changing the rules of the game, you are just succeeding within them. In fact, Badiou equates this kind of satisfaction to Sigmund Freud's concept of the death drive.
Wait, hold on a second. I need to push back hard on this. You're telling me that wanting to be comfortable, wanting to provide a safe home for my family, having a nice house and a decent job means I am driven by a death drive and I'm spiritually dead.
I completely understand the resistance to that term.
It sounds incredibly arrogant on Badiou's part. How does he justify attacking basic human comfort?
When we hear death drive, we think of something morbid or suicidal. But we need to understand Freud's concept of thanatos, the death drive, in opposition to eros, the life drive. Conceptually, the death drive is the deep, unconscious desire to return to a state of inorganic calm. It is the desire for a state of zero tension, zero conflict, zero struggle.
Like wanting to just be a rock.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
When you seek mere satisfaction as your ultimate goal in life, you are seeking an end to the vibrant struggle of existence. You are reducing your unpredictable dynamic subjectivity to a mere objective existence.
A cog in the machine.
You become an object, a cog in the world's machinery, perfectly placed, perfectly still, perfectly satisfied. You are, in a philosophical sense, socially dead because you have ceased to evolve or challenge the impossible.
That is a terrifyingly brilliant way to look at complacency. So if satisfaction is the death drive, the desire for zero tension, what is happiness?
Happiness is the active fidelity to an event. It is the realization, born from encountering an event, that you are capable of things you didn't even know you could do.
What does fidelity mean in this context?
Fidelity is the key word of Badiou's entire ethical system. When an event happens, when the impossible becomes real, it is usually fleeting. The protests eventually end, the intense, overwhelming moment of falling in love settles down, the initial spark of a scientific discovery passes.
Life goes back to normal.
Right. Fidelity is the everyday, grueling work of remaining faithful to what that event revealed, even after the initial rush fades.
So this means true happiness requires intense discipline. It is not relaxing on a hammock on a beach. True happiness is waking up every single day and doing the hard work of living by the new rules revealed by the event, even when the rest of the world tells you it's impossible.
Yes.
And through this rigorous daily discipline, Badiou says a subject is born.
Correct. We usually think of a subject as just a person, a human being. But for Badiou, you are not born a subject. You are born a human animal. You only become a subject when you bind yourself to an event through discipline. The subject is an imminent exception.
Imminent exception. Let's make sure that's crystal clear for the listener.
Imminent means it exists entirely inside the world. You don't float off into mystical space. You are still here, going to work, paying taxes, eating breakfast.
Doing human-animal things.
Exactly. But you are an exception because your inner life and your actions are now operating by the new rules revealed by the event rules that the rest of the world still thinks are impossible. You are a walking exception to the world's standard operating procedure.
And Badiou talks about the generic nature of the subject, meaning true happiness strips away closed, tribal identities. When you become a subject to a truth, your background, your nationality, your class, all of that becomes secondary. He quotes the text beautifully here. Only lovers are in the world.
That is a stunning phrase.
It really is. It means when you are truly profoundly in love, the external identities of you and your partner, your jobs, your social standing, fall away. You create a new, shared generic world that is universal to just the two of you.
He also references Marx's famous idea that workers have no country. The idea that fidelity to a political event transcends arbitrary national borders.
Which strips away that tribal identity.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, true happiness, therefore, is a profound victory over finitude.
Our limitations.
Right. Our normal lives as human animals are finite. We are limited by our physical bodies, our societal status, and ultimately our lifespans. But when you become a subject to an event, you are actively participating in a truth. And truth, for Badiou, is infinite.
So we get to touch the infinite.
Happiness is not reaching a predetermined finish line or a retirement goal. It is the ongoing, subjective process of creating the impossible in the here and now.
That is heavy, but it is so empowering. You aren't just a cog, you are a creator of the impossible. But let's get specific. What kind of truths are we talking about here? Is it just political revolutions? Because if so, that limits happiness to a very specific type of activist.
Thankfully, no. Badiou identifies 4 specific truth procedures. These are the 4 distinct realms where humans can encounter an event and become a subject. And what's beautiful about this book is that he pairs each of these 4 procedures with its own specific emotion of happiness.
Let's spend some real time on these, because this is the core of his theory. Number 1 is politics, and the specific emotion of happiness he pairs with it is enthusiasm.
Yes. Enthusiasm here isn't just being excited about a sports game. It is the profound feeling of collective action. It is the thrill of overturning an unjust system alongside others, the realization that we can do something that the system said we couldn't. It is the emotion of the collective becoming powerful.
Okay, number 2 is science, and the emotion here is beatitude.
Beatitude is a word often associated with religious bliss, but Badiou applies it to science and math. Think of the pure, almost spiritual joy a mathematician feels when they finally, after years of struggle, solve a previously impossible proof.
An epiphany.
Yes, or a scientist discovering a new mechanism of the universe. It is the serene, overwhelming joy of pure intellectual clarity, of seeing the hidden structure of reality.
Number 3 is art, and the emotion is pleasure. But he doesn't mean eating a good piece of cake, does he?
No, this isn't just sensory or biological pleasure. It's the profound intellectual and aesthetic pleasure of experiencing a radically new way of seeing the world. An event in art shatters the previous rules of reality.
Can you give an example?
Think of the invention of Cubism by Picasso and Braque. Before Cubism, the rule of painting was linear perspective, representing the world exactly as the eye sees it from one fixed point.
Right, painting things as they look.
The event of Cubism shattered that rule, showing multiple perspectives simultaneously. The pleasure is the joy of the viewer's mind expanding to accommodate this entirely new visual truth.
And finally, number 4 is love, and the emotion is joy.
Love is perhaps the most accessible truth procedure for most people. Badiou defines love not as romance or sentimentality, but as the rigorous process of 2 fundamentally different individuals constructing a shared reality together.
Building a world for 2.
Exactly. It is the joy of seeing the world through the perspective of the 2, rather than just the one.
Politics, science, art, and love. The 4 pillars of real happiness. And to prove just how seriously Badiou takes this and how deep his architecture goes, we have to briefly mention his massive, intimidating philosophical trilogy. This guy doesn't just write short essays, he builds massive philosophical cathedrals.
Yes, his working method is astonishingly rigorous. The first book in the trilogy is called Being an Event. In this book, he uses extremely complex mathematics, specifically ontology, set theory, and what he calls generic multiplicities, to prove structurally that events can actually happen in a universe of pure being.
Okay, you're going to have to explain set theory and ontology to me like I'm a 5-year-old, because my brain just short-circuited.
I'll do my best. Ontology is the philosophical study of being, what it simply means for things to exist. For Badiou, ontology is mathematics, specifically set theory. Imagine a set as just a collection of things. A bag of marbles is a set. In mathematics, you can have sets of numbers, sets of sets, infinitely complex groupings. Badiou uses the rigorous rules of how sets are formed to prove that the universe is not just a solid, unchangeable block.
So it's not sealed shut.
Exactly. He proves mathematically that there are gaps, voids, where an unpredictable event can burst through.
Okay, that helps. The math proves that change is structurally possible. What about the second book?
The second book is Logics of Worlds. Here he moves from abstract mathematical being to how things actually appear in specific physical worlds. He uses a branch of math called topology. Topology studies how spaces are organized and connected. Badiou uses it to explain how an abstract truth, like a political idea, is literally incorporated into physical bodies marching in a street.
And the third book, which he discusses as an upcoming project, our source text, is The Immanence of Truths. This deals with subjectivation, how the finite human actually experiences the infinite truth. He references Georg Cantor here, right?
Yes, Georg Cantor was a mathematician who revolutionized our understanding of infinity. Cantor proved that not all infinities are the same size. There are countable infinities, like the set of all whole numbers, and uncountable, vastly larger infinities, like all the decimal numbers between 0 and 1.
Different sizes of forever.
Badiou uses this concept of very large infinities to talk about the scale of truth.
Okay, the finite experiencing the infinite. Let's dive into that dialectic. Badiou's exact definition here is that happiness is a finite enjoyment of the infinite. We are finite creatures. We get tired, we get sick, we die. But through the disciplines of politics, science, art, or love, we get to touch something that lives forever.
But this poses a logical problem. How can a limited, finite human mind hold an infinite, absolute truth without breaking? To explain how this is logically possible, Badiou relies on something called paraconsistent logic, developed by the Brazilian mathematician Newton da Costa.
More math. Okay, lay it on me.
I'll use an analogy. Classical logic, going all the way back to Aristotle, relies on the absolute law of non-contradiction. Something cannot be A and not A at the exact same time. A statement cannot be both true and false.
Right.
If a contradiction enters a classical logical system, it causes what logicians call an explosion. The whole system breaks down and becomes meaningless.
Like a fatal error in a computer program that causes the whole machine to crash.
Exactly. But Newton da Costa developed paraconsistent logic. This is a mathematical system where the principle of non-contradiction doesn't strictly apply in all cases. In this system, contradictions can exist, they can be processed, without causing the entire system to instantly crash. The system is robust enough to contain the contradiction.
Okay, let's unpack this with a real-world example Badiou uses. Imagine two people standing in an art gallery looking at a masterpiece painting. They are both experiencing the truth procedure of art. Person A looks at the painting and perceives it as a dark, brooding commentary on human grief. Person B looks at the exact same painting and perceives it as a vibrant celebration of rebirth. They have completely different, totally contradictory perceptions.
Yes. Classical logic would say they can't both be right. One must be true, one must be false, or the painting means nothing. But paraconsistent logic allows us to see that these finite human contradictions can coexist without destroying the infinite unity of the truth of the artwork. The artwork is profound enough to hold both contradictions.
And the same applies to love, right?
Absolutely. Love is a shared truth procedure between two people. But the two individuals experience that love from radically different, often contradictory subjective positions. In Badiou's traditional formulation, he talks about the male and female positions, though we can understand this broadly as any two fundamentally distinct subjectivities.
Right, because no two people see things the exact same way.
Two partners do not experience the exact same thing. Their perceptions of the relationship will often contradict. Yet, these contradictions do not destroy the relationship. They are held together in the robust, unified truth of their love.
That is genuinely beautiful. It means we don't have to agree on exactly how we are experiencing the truth as long as we are both maintaining fidelity to it. So we have these four truth procedures. Where does philosophy fit into all this? Is philosophy a fifth truth procedure? Can I encounter an event just by reading Badiou?
Badiou is incredibly adamant about this. No, philosophy is not a truth procedure. Philosophy does not produce truths. You cannot have an event in philosophy. Events only happen in the physical world of art, science, politics, or love.
So if philosophy doesn't make truth, what is the point of all these books? What is the philosopher's job?
Philosophy creates a space. It creates the intellectual architecture, where those four wildly different truths can coexist and be thought together. Philosophy's job is to separate the true from the false within a given historical epoch, and to act as a diagnostic tool for the era. It asks, what are the events of our time? What is the art, the science, the politics, the love that is breaking the rules of the world right now?
He compares himself to Plato here, right? Both Badiou and Plato believe that the philosopher is ultimately the happiest person because they live a life guided by the idea. They have the privilege of witnessing and connecting all these different truth procedures.
Yes, but Badiou also critiques Plato. He says Plato had the right concept of the good, but he lacked the tools to truly rationally communicate it. When Plato tried to explain the ultimate good, he had to resort to metaphors, allegories, like the famous allegory of the cave in myths.
Because he didn't have the math.
Exactly. Badiou believes that today we don't need myth. We have modern mathematics. From Eudoxus to Cantor, modern math finally gives us the precise, rational tools to communicate the infinite nature of truth without relying on poetry or myth. This raises an important question. If philosophy just organizes other people's truths, is there such a thing as a philosophical subject? Can you be transformed purely by philosophy?
Right, can reading this book change you?
Badiou admits this is an unresolved problem in his own monumental body of work. He isn't entirely sure what a purely philosophical subject looks like. However, he vehemently rejects the idea that philosophy is just general rhetoric or a bunch of clever language games, which is what the ancient sophists claimed and what many modern postmodernists claim today.
Because he believes in truth.
He is a materialist.
Yeah.
He believes in the concrete reality of the physical world. But he is a materialist who leaves room for what the ancient philosopher Epicurus called the Kleineman.
The Kleineman.
It translates to the swerve. Epicurus believed the universe was made of atoms falling in a straight line. But occasionally, an atom would randomly swerve, causing a collision that created worlds. For Badiou, this represents chance. There's always the possibility of chance, of an unpredictable event that breaks the deterministic, calculated rules of reality.
And it's that swerve, that chance encounter, that opens the door to happiness. To wrap up this massive theoretical journey, I want to rapidly fire off a few of Badiou's 21 definitions of happiness found at the very end of his text. It's like a summary manifesto.
Let's hear them.
Listen to these. Happiness is the emotion of the true. Happiness is a victory over finitude. Happiness is the enjoyment of the impossible. And my personal favorite, happiness is, in a sense, obtained by the force of the will.
That last one perfectly encapsulates the discipline we discussed. Happiness is not an accident that happens to you while you're waiting on the couch. It is obtained by the force of your will to remain faithful to an event.
So why does all this dense French philosophy and set theory matter to you listening right now? Let's bring it home. If you've ever felt a lingering, nagging sense of unease with the comfortable, predictable, algorithmic satisfactions of modern life, the nice car, the safe job, the endless scrolling Badiou validates that feeling.
He tells you you're not wrong to feel that way.
He is telling you that you aren't crazy. That unease is your philosophical desire fighting for air. You are being called to look for an event. Maybe it's a radical piece of art that changes your perception, a scientific discovery that reorients your reality, a terrifying, all-consuming love, or a political movement that demands a new justice. Badiou is challenging you to look for the impossible and to subject yourself to the rigorous, difficult discipline of true happiness.
It is a profound shift in perspective. Instead of seeking comfort, we should be seeking the capacity to be transformed.
Exactly. And I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over, something built right into the DNA of this text. What if the profound sense of despair or boredom we so often feel when looking at the modern world isn't a sign that we are psychologically broken?
A shift in how we view our own pain.
Yes. What if that despair isn't a medical condition to be cured with more satisfaction, but rather the exact necessary starting point? What if that feeling is the objective uncertainty Kierkegaard talked about? The required emptiness needed to finally encounter an event and become a true subject. What if your despair is just the fertile soil for the impossible? Don't forget to follow us and subscribe to stay updated on our latest episodes and never miss a step in this odyssey of thought. Until next time, keep questioning.